What's up, SCS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. It's not a tagline, it is our reality as we dive back into the infamous Dan Markel murder case. He is the Harvard-educated FSU Law Professor, gunned down in his Tallahassee driveway back in 2014. Two hitmen and a go-between, a woman, are already convicted of the crime and are sitting in prison. Ex-brother-in-law Charlie Adelson is now sitting himself in a Leon County jail near Tallahassee, where Tim Jansen is. He is awaiting his murder trial. A trial date is now set for October 23rd. So the question looms, could other Adelsons be indicted in the meantime? One career military lawyer and legal mind believes there are at least 125 reasons and growing right now why Wendi Adelson could be charged. Welcome to our best guests. Starting off, the man with the least amount of hair on his head, but plenty on his face, is Lieutenant Colonel retired Carl Steinbeck, a nearly 30-year judge advocate for the U.S. Army. He is now in private practice with his own law firm called the Steinbeck Law Firm PLLC, and he hosts his own YouTube channel, Jury Trial Mentor, with his brother, John Steinbeck. If you are jealous, you should be. That is a Surviving the Survivor hat. It goes beautifully with that mahogany wood. That is famed Tallahassee defense attorney R. Timothy Jansen. He is a partner in the firm Jansen and Davis. By the way, he's also a phenomenal chef. Can I tell them your Insta handle, Tim, or is that
sure? Absolutely.
Tim's Instagram handle is Courtroom Chef, and you can see him cooking away all the time. That hat will not mess that hair up. By the way, I got a haircut with my son today, and she kind of dude me all out, but I didn't touch it. So, last but not least, the man with the best toupee in the business. Not really a toupee. I joke. Everyone writes and asks if it is. That is John Singer, co-founder of Singer Deutsch LLP, a graduate of the Georgetown. They don't call it Georgetown Law School. They call it the Georgetown Law Center. Is that right, John?
That is correct.
That is correct. So he's a graduate of the Georgetown Law Center, designated a super lawyer for 693 years in a row. He makes regular appearances as a CNBC analyst. And by the way, John Singer, I found out, is one of those dads. I saw him on Instagram, goes to his son's games. My wife says, "Is this John Singer?" And I said, "Let me look." And he was screaming and going wild and running up and down the sidelines with his long arms flailing away. And
I am the coach. I am the coach of the team. So I am that dad.
He is that dad. And my wife said to me, and I said, "What a disgrace that he's acting this way." And she said to me, "You were coaching your son's 3-year-old baseball team, and you were way worse, screaming at your son." So we're both that dad. I hope to get to be even more of that dad and a worse influence on him. Anyway, we welcome everybody. I am loopy, not because of coffee, but because we already did a submersible show. Look at this. I'd never seen this before. 3 brand new members in a row. Tessa, shout out. Karen, shout out. Chrissy, shout out. Now, we don't have those sweet Tim Jansen hats at the merch store yet. Those were exclusively gotten by us a while ago, but I'm working to get some of them because they're pretty snazzy. I love them. I'm wearing it on my flight this weekend. By the way, before I forget, I am away next week. I'm going to try to do a live Koberger show. He is in court June 27th. I'm going to see if I can effort that, as they say in news. But we have a brand new series called Surviving My Biggest Case that you will not want to miss. And we're going to put those up one for each day next week. You go down memory lane with one of our best guests who tells you about the biggest case of their law enforcement career. It's actually really awesome, if I may say so myself. Without further ado, I can tell they want me to shut up. Carl Steinbeck, we are, I believe, every time we do this, I say, can you please send a list, as does Tim Jansen, John Singer never does because he's probably better organized. But we are starting today on point 73. We are continuing 100 and however many growing reasons why Wendi Adelson should be indicted. Get us your questions as Carl kicks this off. Carl, without further ado.
All right, great. So here we got for 73. Wendi spent some time that week of Dan's last life on this earth, walking with her for a lengthy walk, and yet she would not talk to Dan that week because she claimed she had laryngitis. That's what she told Detective Isom in her interview. And the reason that Dan was wanting to speak with her was that there was an upcoming change of schools, and Dan had to approve that because Wendi had not involved him in that process from the beginning. So I thought this was very telling because it shows that she was trying to make active efforts to say one thing but do another. She's claiming she has laryngitis, can't talk to him at all. But yet, if you look at her phone records, you see she's talking a whole lot on certain days that week, especially on that Friday.
That is interesting. I actually did not know that. John Singer, probably not incriminating in a court of law, but in the court of public opinion and in terms of tugging on the emotions of jurors, how does that play in?
I think that resonates with me because if you recall the week of the murder, she had no contact with Dan Markel because of the alleged laryngitis, and she had no contact with Jeff Lacasse because she gave him the cease and desist for the 1 week period. And I think the reason why she had contact with neither person was because when she had been home in South Florida, where this plot was being hatched the prior few weeks, I think that they instructed Wendi, they being the Adelson family, not to have contact with Dan or with Jeff because they were worried that somehow she was going to blow things up. So the Adelsons, wanted her to have no contact with either of those individuals. She had a little bit of contact with Jeff Lacasse before the cease and desist, and it was during that period, that Monday evening, where she said to him that Charlie had looked into hiring a hitman. So she couldn't control her impulses. So I think there was an edict from the family to have no contact with either Dan or Jeff. So I think that's a very good point by Carl.
John Singer, I know I couldn't help but notice you're not in front of the luxury bar. What happened?
Well, the kids are in overnight camp for the next 7 weeks, so the bar isn't as necessary as it normally is. So let's just say that. I'm much more relaxed tonight than I have been in a long time.
Freedom. You've got freedom. One of my kids is in sleepaway camp, but there is freedom. By the way, Dog Mom writes, and Tim, I'm getting to you, don't worry. Hey, SDS Nation, ready for this? I'm saddened about the Titan tragedy. I should have definitely mentioned that off the top. The previous show today was extremely informative and love the sub-brief guy who knows his stuff about subs and submersibles. Obviously, we're thinking of these families, a lot of hatred directed at some of them, especially the owner of Ocean Gate. But, it might be someone's fault, but it's no one's fault that they are no longer here. Let's think about their families, I guess, throughout this show. Sub-brief is an amazing guy. I just met him on this little journey down Submersible Road. He was a sonar man in the United States Coast Guard or Navy. I'm not sure which, but he was in submarines, and his expertise was listening underwater. So he was guiding us through that. We had some amazing experts. And at the very end of the show today, we got unconfirmed reports about this explosion, and his reaction was sort of priceless. You should watch it. It actually just gave me the goosebumps thinking about it. So anyway, it was what I thought was a very interesting show, not because I was hosting it, just because it's a little piece of history captured. Again, that aired at noon. It's on the website. Followed here real quickly by Sarah. Hey, Dog Mom, I hope they do other shows like that one. Loving the diversity of STS. I'm a news guy. Can't shake it the way John Singer can't shake making dough as a high level attorney. So I will be doing, as Tim Jansen chuckles from his mahogany. So I will be doing anytime there's a big human interest story of this nature, we will be on it as far as I can tell. Tim Jansen. So Wendi Adelson claimed to have laryngitis. Carl Steinbeck points out she was talking to friends that whole week. Again, your feelings on this in the court of law, not in the court of public opinion, because it might tug on some jurors, I guess.
Well, I think George is going to, hopefully, she'll get some of this information that Carl's put together for her. And her and Sarah can come up with this little chronology and show actions that are inconsistent with her normal behavior. Looks like she was trying to go radio silent, maybe because she didn't want to tip anybody off, or maybe she just didn't want to have any communication, have any kind of a animosity or an angry event that could come back and link to her to something that happened, that was going to happen in a few days. So I think it is relevant. And I think if put together, especially in a slideshow, or you get an expert, or she can get her investigator, Jason Newland, to get up there and show this, it could be really powerful. Because you don't really have much on Wendi. All you're going to have is her actions, right? And her a few communications with Joe Lacasse, but you have her actions, like driving by, going to get the bullet bourbon. Her actions, or inaction, not asking about her husband. Is he alive? Was he killed? That's all you have on her.
Tim Jansen, how important is it for an attorney like you representing criminal defendants? How important is it to get to the emotions of the jurors as it is to show them evidence?
Evidence can be altered by emotions. You heard the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Or if you get that witness to say the one thing that helps your case, and you pause and you let the courtroom go silent, let the jury fully encompass what just happened, then slightly look at the jury to give it the crescendo effect it deserves. And I know I do that. And it's actually a lot of fun too. When you finally get that witness and you get him to the point where you got the point you want, and he makes it and he takes it, it doesn't happen all the time, John will tell you, but when it does, it's really exhilarating.
John Singer, how often are you in court?
A lot, but more of my cases are subject to mandatory arbitration, because when you litigate against investment banks, which is the bulk of our practice, unless it's a claim for discrimination, which is exempt and into court, the rest of the claims for compensation, denial of bonus, wrongful termination, taking away deferred comp, defamation, those are all mandatorily arbitrable at a forum called FINRA, and we're there a lot. So arbitration, we use the euphemism, we call it a trial, because it is. You're just not appearing before a jury or a judge, you're appearing before 3 arbitrators from the industry, but we're in arbitration a lot.
So you don't have to necessarily have the same sort of showmanship as a Tim Jansen, or do you?
You don't, because the arbitrators you're not dealing with a very wide or broad swath of individuals. They're usually 3 people who have some affiliation to the financial services industry, tend to be around the same age, tend to be retirees, although not exclusively. And it's really not about emotion. Yeah. And you're not arguing, it's about money. There's no life's lost. There's no crimes that are been committed or being charged. It's simply a matter of compensation. So you don't have the same emotional gyrations that you would in a criminal defense practice.
Well, as Detective Phil Waters from the Houston PD, who's investigated over 400 homicides, telling me it's either sex, money, or drugs, usually the motive, and plenty of people kill over money. I am not T-Pain. Shout out to everyone in STS Nation. Shout out to Joel and the Chief of everything for keeping this place cool. Triple shout out to the best guests. That's you guys, followed by this so far my favorite comment. Bonnie Lee Lopez, best guest. John Singer is in the house. Brilliance and so handsome. So very handsome. Don't worry, Tim Jansen. The hair comments are coming. Number 74. Carl Steinbeck.
All right, this ties into 73, and that's that Wendi intentionally even avoided Dan when she bumped into him, sort of bumped him at the Whole Foods market. She saw him, I guess, from outside the store. Him and the boys were inside the store, and she just zipped it out of there, didn't want to have any interaction with him. And I think that is another data point that a prosecutor would want to bring in to show that there's something amiss here. There's something that shows that she had some kind of consciousness of something different going on that week in Dan's life, and she wanted to extract herself from that. And she didn't want to bump into him for another reason, which is because then she couldn't fake her laryngitis. So she didn't want to have a conversation about the boys, the school, upcoming school planning and whatnot. So I think that all ties in very nicely with the theory that this is indicating that she was part of the knowledgeable team that was that knew something was going down that week with Dan, and she didn't want to have to talk to him. Why waste her time, and why maybe slip something up? And like John was saying, she was probably instructed to do everything you can to avoid everybody up there, especially Dan and Jeff.
My chief investigator joined us. Windsor.
Oh, I love it. Look at him. Guy lives with a laugh. The guy lives better than 99% of Americans. This dog. Look at him on that green, screen share, whatever that is. So I got to tell you, Tim Jansen, after now reading 73 and 74, and if Carl is the prosecutor, if he's Georgia Kappelman up there, I who am a juror, because I know nothing about nothing. Basically a dum-dum. If I'm hearing this right now, I'm starting to think this woman had something to do with it, because she is making a big effort to avoid this guy to fake this illness. By the way, shout out to Asian American Legal Focus. Check out her YouTube page. She covers Dan Markel, knows this really well, as is Fancy Fiction, who I do not see yet. But Tim Jansen, what about point 74 on top, adding to 73? Is Carl starting to make a strong case here?
74, Carl, where'd you get that evidence from?
He made it up.
How do we know?
I've had that for a while, so I believe that was from
the interrogation.
Her own statement?
Right.
She said it in her interrogation with the police. She said that they asked her the last time she saw Dan, and she said that she saw him at Whole Foods during her day with the kids. It was, if you remember, they had every other week custody, right. But on Wednesdays of your non-week, you had the kids. So she had the kids that Wednesday, and she ran into him at Whole Foods and claimed that, interactions with him were particularly difficult and fraught, and she wanted to enjoy her time with the kids. So she said that during the interrogation. That's when she said it. Well,
obviously her conduct, again, you just ask a normal person, what would a normal person do in their normal routine? And I guess when you have a week on, week off with divorce and the hatred, volatile nature, what is normal? Probably nothing's normal. One day they could be nice, the next day they could avoid each other. But if you build that pattern of conduct that looks like she's trying to distance herself or is not acting right, that could be impressive, and it can be very valuable. Her conduct is what's going to probably get her indicted, because I don't think there's enough physical evidence itself to get her indicted.
Tim Jansen, I'm probably going to get you in trouble right now, but I know the wife is away. When you go out for, I don't know, to get a Slurpee at 7-Eleven later, do you take Windsor in the car with you? Does he go everywhere with you?
I've been taking him to the office. He's not that well-behaved trained yet without a leash. He likes to jump on people, even though he's a puppy.
Does he cuddle in bed with you? I want to know.
Oh, yes, for sure.
That's beautiful.
It's his bed.
Yeah, so does Ethel. Ethel is a large boxer, though, so it's becoming a problem. Question for you, Tim, before we get on to 75. This comes from a friend of the show, Jimmy Castellano, and his wife, Jeannie, who live in Portland, Oregon.
Yep.
Tim, do you know much about Florida attorney Nathan Prince, who almost got Henry Segura off quadruple murder of kids and a mom? Would he have been a good fit to defend Charlie? Do you know this guy?
I do know. I know Nate for a long time. His office is like about 5 houses down from mine. I'm not sure he almost got Henry Segura off. That was kind of wishful thinking. I think the facts of that case were horrendous. They had some evidence that was kept out, that the last judge, and that judge was Judge Hankinson, who had the original case. He was pretty strict. He's a very strict judge. So they wanted to bring in evidence that it was a hitman from a drug thing, and they weren't allowed to bring it in. It was a brutal killing. The kids were shot and put in a bathtub and stacked on top of each other. It was a long trial, but I never got any sense that from the jury verdict, there was multiple trials, that there was any kind of, going to lean towards acquittal. So I know he worked on that case for a minute. I think the guy was in jail for like 6 years because COVID hit. He had a retrial, and he was ultimately convicted.
Catherine Regier, who sent me a beautiful Father's Day gift. I love that, out in Hawaii. Mahalo for the excellent informative coverage of the sub disaster the past couple of days. Heartbreaking outcome. It is in fact tragic. I heard reporters were asking if they still plan to recover the bodies. Sometimes reporters are slow on the uptake. There is nothing to recover. That was a massive implosion, explosion, whatever you want to call it. And they are no longer in human form. So that is very, very sad. Carl, on to number 75.
This one had to do with Wendi applying for a school for the two boys without conferring with Dan beforehand. She put him into, I guess, a wheelhouse, a random drawing kind of thing. She happened to actually get approved for the boys to be enrolled there. But Dan was never brought into the conversation of this. He was completely caught off guard by it. And that's who he was supposed to speak with. And he was actually on the phone with somebody from that school when he actually had the bullets to the head. And so this is something that that he wasn't sure about. He maybe would have been okay with that, but it just looked like this was maybe a ruse. I think a jury would pick up on this as being sort of a diversion to make it appear like she had plans to stay in Tallahassee, but then cross that with the indications from Jeff Lacoste saying that when he told him she's cleaning out her room when she was down there in South Florida the 2 weeks before Dan was murdered. So it just doesn't add up. There's something very hokey with this, and I think it all leads to her having suspicious behavior, especially that week before the murder and week of the murder.
John Singer, could this item, number 75, potentially backfire, where jurors say to themselves, well, maybe she didn't have plans to leave Tallahassee. Maybe she really was looking at a school. Is this a risky move on Carl's part if he was trying this case for the state, or, bringing this case forward? Would that be a risky issue to go at?
I think so. It is risky, but it's sort of in line with her playbook, right? I mean, in the interrogation, she was offering up information that an otherwise guilty person wouldn't have offered up, right? And that's part of, I think, the mosaic she was painting there and sort of the ruse that she was constructing. So in conformance with that would be what Carl is positing now, which is, part of, she would say, as she would about the interrogation, that a guilty person or someone who had any designs on leaving for South Florida would never be looking into the next school year and going forward with the school and getting down that path. So I agree with Carl on that. I think that it's certainly in line with her MO, right, which is to act the part of someone who is or to argue that somebody who is not guilty, would never do the kind of things that she's doing. So I think it could backfire, but I think it's a good point by Carl.
Tim Jansen, do you care to weigh in? By the way, Marina in the south of Spain, if you see my brain somewhere, please contact me, for I am scattered today. I know the feeling. Go ahead, Tim.
Nothing is more effective than taking the government's argument and turning it around on them. Because the government can't say that's not true, because they put the evidence out there. And when you put the government's own evidence out there that supports your theory of defense, it's debilitating to the defense.
Tim Jansen, give me an example of that.
Well, that was not a bad one there, where she was trying to get him into a school in Tallahassee, and she randomly did it without his permission. Now, she really thought that she was going to hire a hitman to kill him, and they're going South Florida. Why would I get him in a wheel? Why would I try to get him into school in Tallahassee?
So if you're in a courtroom and you're now defending Wendi Adelson, you're going to hammer this point home. You're going to go into Tim Jansen criminal defense mode. You're going to say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, look, she is actively looking at a school here in Tallahassee, not in South Florida. Why would she be doing that, right? Is that what you're going to do?
Not only that, I'm going to call the school officials. the person that got her the random wheel, I'm going to ask what grade she applied for, when she expected them to enroll, because that just further takes the issue to your side. It's like a chess piece. We're moving that to our board.
How does a subpoena work? Can you just subpoena whoever the hell you want to subpoena?
Yes and no. I've got an issue. I'm going to subpoena the Attorney General of Florida, and I'm wondering if I'm going to be able to, but I might get their designee. But yeah, if you have a witness, and certainly in federal court, if you have a witness and you have a problem, that federal judge will send the U.S. Marshals to get them. And subpoenaing for documents, pretty much the same. Federal court, you got to get permission, a Rule 17C subpoena. But yeah, if you got a subpoena, they got to come. Now, their lawyers can always file a motion to quash the subpoena for various reasons. But yeah.
Wow, interesting. American Asian legal focus, Asian American legal focus. I had it backwards. My question, if Tim is able to answer this, is Daniel Rashbaum actively consulting with you on the case? I know you said you had lunch with him at one point. Do you care to divulge? Can you divulge?
I can divulge that I met with Daniel in my office, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half. And either I gave him all the wisdom that I had, or he didn't need any more wisdom, because I haven't had any contact with him since.
There you go. Carl, number 76, says Nicola is watching from the Gold Coast at 9 a.m.
Wendi had testified when she was asked by Attorney Jeff Lacoste that the boys were Dan's world. He wanted to get that out of her. And she actually did admit that, but she right away interjected with a dig that said that, but his work is also his world. And so I just thought that was another key moment where she's deflecting, doesn't want to admit anything that is favorable to Dan. She still has hostility and hatred towards Dan. And so this deflection and demeaning and making digs at Dan, I think really helps show the picture that she is really still angry about Dan. She still can't stand him. And this is something that was right in front of a jury, and a jury would really pick up on that and say, wow, she's so quick to fire off that kind of a response. And so that I thought was a very good point for the prosecution.
Good to see new names. Tornado Artist is here, followed by Shaq Oatmeal, one of my favorite names. And as I say, STS is better than crack. What's good, STS junkies? John Singer, I don't know. The argument can be made of, most men, not to be stereotypical, that their careers are, that they're obsessed with their careers. Does this hold water?
I don't think so. That one doesn't do a whole lot for me. I think that she took, in both trials, in both the 2019 and the 2022 trial, she took these unnecessary and unprovoked shots at Dan. Carl just cited to one example. Another example was when Chris DeCoste asked or said, that Dan was a great father, and she said, a very good father. So she was always very quick to parse out words to demean, as Carl said, Dan. But I don't think that's consciousness of guilt. I don't think that's, and I don't think she would ever testify in that way or in that manner at her own trial. She may have taken shots at him and may have felt emboldened to do so in these prior trials, but if she's ever put on trial, she'll be an entirely different person, entirely different witness. Some of the snark will be gone. Some of those unsolicited shots at Dan will be gone. There won't be reverence towards him, but there'll be much more deference. And she won't be parsing out the words of either Georgia Kappelman or Chris DeCoste like she was doing in the other two trials. So that I can't say that one does a whole lot for me.
Tim Jansen, by the way, I'm not sure. It says here, Attorney Jeff Lacoste, but that, of course, is someone different. This is Attorney Chris DeCoste.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, all good. So Tim, what about that? Basically saying that taking a dig at Dan, saying that his work is his world.
You can say that about 50% of the male population, probably. At that point, the prosecution's going to is going to hammer on that. But the defense is going to say, wait a minute, they're going through a brutal divorce. Of course, she's going to say bad things about him. He won't let her leave. He's ruined her career at FSU. So there's going to be animosity. Absolutely. And that's all it was. And the state's going to try to show more intent. But if you get a lot of divorced people on that witness stand who've got ex-wives with kids, they're probably not going to take it as much more than just it's a bitter divorce.
John Singer, let me ask you kind of a much broader macro question. As an attorney yourself, how frustrating is it? Because you've said it openly, and you believe Wendi is complicit and guilty, but you got to prove it, and it's just not that easy, I guess, as we're finding out right now. What about this sort of like dichotomy between in your mind knowing what is real and then the law where you have to sit there and actually show the evidence? For you, is it sort of a frustrating juggling act there?
I mean, it can be, especially in the world of arbitration in which I practice. You're not allowed depositions. So the first time you ever hear anybody speak is at the actual arbitration hearing / trial. So it's a lot of speculation as to what witnesses are going to say. You don't necessarily have a good handle on it. Whereas in court, you obviously have deposition transcripts. And in this case, for example, all the witnesses who testified in the 2019 and 2022 trials were deposed, and some of them were deposed multiple times. I mean, Luis Rivera sat for a number of depositions. Jeff Lacasse sat for depositions. So the answer to your question is there's oftentimes a dichotomy between what you know and what you believe in your heart and what you can prove. In the civil world that I practice in, you don't have this as big of an issue because the standard is a preponderance of evidence. It's a 51% likelihood, right? In the world that Tim and I guess Carl practice in, you have to prove, or in the case of the prosecutors, you have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So the burden of proof is much higher. The burden of proof in my case is not anywhere near what the prosecutors face in the criminal arena.
Roxanne A. Tim, great cat, followed by Raul Thomas. Tim is sporting his hat. Look at this. Tornado artist just became a YouTube member. Thank you, Tornado. Carl Steinbeck, I believe we're on 77 now. Yeah,
just to circle back though on this point, the point being, this is not an ongoing divorce situation. We're talking about this being going beyond the scope of the question that was asked, where she's making a dig at somebody who's the deceased father of her children. That's a totally different context. It's not in the middle of a divorce where you don't have, a death of one of the participants. This is talking about an actual murdered individual of the father of her two boys, and it's years later. So I think for that kind of a quick spin of an answer and a twist of it, I think it does show very revealing things, and that's what I think a jury would pick up. So I look at things as how to prosecute it for the jury, not just my own individual thoughts. And like I say, these things are pixels that paint a big picture. So now all these points are a big dagger, right? So you got big daggers mixed with some little daggers, mixed with some medium daggers. But what they all do is they paint a picture. And so us going individually to each one of these and say, well, that one's not that strong, or that one doesn't seem, maybe that one could go and flip the other side. That to me is not a concern as a prosecutor, because I'm going to bring the whole kitchen sink of this kind of stuff. And this is what juries pick up on. And one little nugget of information can help seal the deal. So what I see constantly is trial attorneys lose their cases because they don't bring in enough detail. And so that's what I've done on this. I've scoured through this, and there's a lot of details we haven't covered yet, but all these things add up to paint the same picture that I think that anybody presenting this kind of stuff would have a real solid expectation to win a case against Wendi.
And I love Carl's approach. Sorry, John. I was going to say, I love Carl's approach because it's almost like death by 1,000 cuts. Carl is unflappable. His brother is a commercial airline pilot, and he's got sort of the same mentality. You got to be steady, cool, calm, and collected. John, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that the Wendi, and I'll just amplify what I said earlier, the Wendi that you saw in the last two trials where she testified for an hour and a half each time as a witness, as opposed to a target, you're not going to see anything close to that Wendi Adelson if she's ever on trial and she ever takes a stand in her own defense. Once her lawyers get done with her and have anesthetized her and have polished her up to be a witness that's going to be likable as opposed to snarky and evil and taking gratuitous shots, you're not going to hear any of that stuff. She's not going to be taking shots at Dan. She's going to be a very different Wendi Adelson on the witness stand as a criminal defendant than as a witness as part of a larger prosecution of other people. So she's never going to comport herself in the way in which we saw in the last two trials. Now, someone could argue, well, she is who she is and she may not be able to help herself. After lots and lots of time with her own counsel preparing her to testify, she's not going to resemble the Wendi Adelson you've seen in the last two trials.
Tim, that's a really interesting point. Have you ever defended an attorney, Tim? And how do you
Yes.
They're the worst clients, right?
Well, they're difficult, almost like defending a doctor or a politician. They know what they know, and they're only using you because they can't represent themselves. And they believe, like President Trump, he got out there and gave statements on national TV about the crime, which are completely admissible in his trial. And I'm sure Chris Kise and his lawyers are fuming that now they're stuck with whatever he said with Brett Baer. But lawyers are difficult because they have their view. I recently have a lawyer, and they get so immersed in their own cases, they're not able to look at it objectively. And if you get someone with a little knowledge and legal training and not being objective, it really makes it difficult to represent them.
Real quick, Shaquille O'Neal is taking a pot shot from center court here. No other person will be indicted. John Singer, any words for Shaq?
I mean, I think that's a very bearish outlook, although it does comport with what Jeremy Mutt said. He, I think, said on, I don't know if it was this show or a different show, that he didn't believe other indictments were coming. I don't believe that's the case. I just don't. I do believe other people would be indicted. Donna, for sure. I'm hoping, and I think Wendi eventually will be. Harvey, I think, is remote at best. He's pushing 80 at this point. He's going to be 79 in June this month, or even early July, I think it is. So by the time they get to him, I don't think there'll be a tremendous interest in it. But I mean, what Jeremy had said, and I respect his opinion. I think he's very bright and very articulate, and he certainly has better familiarity with Tallahassee than I do. He said that, if they convict Charlie, they just may, and I'm paraphrasing here, but they just may lose steam and they may lose interest, that they got 4 people. They don't need to devote any more resources or go forward. I don't believe that's going to be the case. And I'm certainly hoping it isn't. They have Donna dead to rights right now. I mean, they've had her dead to rights since 2016, just like they did with Charlie. I can't see Donna skating on this. She's going to be, I think, 73. There's still time to prosecute her. I really am hoping that Shaquille O'Neal is incorrect, and then I think he will be ultimately.
Tim Jansen, no one knows Tallahassee better than you. Do you foresee Georgia Kappelman saying, "Well, I got Charlie, I'm done now"? Do you ever see that happening?
Well, I think they want to focus all their attention on Charlie. And they really don't want to be sidestepping where you have one lawyer, you're going to do this prosecution on this. And they want to really get a clean shot on all their target at Charlie. I think Tim is, I think that Charlie, they got a pretty good case. I don't think Wendi, they have a good case enough to charge. They can charge her. She can indict. They can charge her. I don't think they have enough to convict her. Donna, I think, will get indicted. And the father, I don't think, is going to get charged. Jeremy Mutz was in the office. He worked in the office. He had a disagreement with Willie over another murder case that has still not been solved, one of the oldest murder cases in Tallahassee. And he was doing some stuff. And Willie kind of screwed this case up from the very beginning also. So now you have his following U.S. state attorney who worked for Willie and was very close to Willie, but he's a little more aggressive than Willie. Willie was not aggressive at all. And he liked slam dunks. Now, Georgia's going to do what Georgia and Jack tells her to do. But if she had the case, if she felt comfortable indicting Georgia, she would have done it by now. And I think the only reason she's not indicting the mother at this point is not to separate and be separated in her devotion to get this prosecution of Charlie. Because I agree with John. Donna's clearly got enough to be charged and possibly convicted.
Here it comes, Tim. Bonnie Lee Lopez. Oh no, Tim is covering his handsome locks with an STS hat. And Carl, don't think you're done yet. CJ says, I cannot wait for the list on Charlie's reasons too. Love you, Carl. Carl, let's move to the next point here.
Oh, I just want to circle back though with I totally disagree with what John said about Wendy's going to be, prep better and polished better, however you said it, John. And that is the fact that ultimately what it comes down to from my experience is, are you telling a truthful theory of what actually happened? Is it grounded in truth? Or is it sort of like your clients telling you what they want you to say and believe, and you sort of got to go with it and then poke holes in the government's case? In this particular situation, to me, it's so very clear cut of involvement by her, and she's done such a terrible job. And she doesn't do a good job, is what you heard from Jeff Lacoste, because when he grilled her about whether she was cheating on him and whatnot, I mean, he said she curled up like a baby and was crying. So she has not been subject to any kind of withering cross-examination, and she will fold so bad. And she's done so bad just only being asked very simple softball questions. Think about all the questions that Georgia asked her in these trials, and they were very easy to answer questions, and she struggled with them big time. She came across as a terrible witness. I mean, it was cringeworthy as a defense counsel to see if that was a witness of yours to act that way. So I don't believe for 1 second she's going to get better. I totally believe she will not be prepared enough to actually take the stand in any defense. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the next one.
Hold on one sec, John. You were about to look like you're about to retort, and I want to see these lawyers fight with each other now.
No. I think that Carl's right to an extent. I mean, I think that will she, subject to a withering cross-examination, will she be susceptible? Absolutely. Is she a bad liar? Of course. What I'm saying, I was only addressing, it was a very myopic point I was addressing, which is her snark and her gratuitous shots at Dan. Mm-hmm. She will not be taking those in her own trial. That doesn't mean that she's going to become a great witness in a macro sense, and that she's going to be impervious to a skilled and effective cross-examination. I don't believe that. And I do believe she'll come across as a liar. The one point I was making was strictly in relation to the point about the gratuitous shots at Dan. She will not be taking those. Her lawyer will, when her lawyer gets done with her, they will clean that aspect up. That you can clean up. The other stuff you can't. You can't do a personality transformation, but you can prevent her from doing those types of things in her own trial. That's all I was saying.
What makes you think that John Laurel is going to let her testify at a trial with a case that's barely circumstantial and no direct evidence of her involvement?
I agree with that too. I wasn't saying she's 100% going to testify. I'm saying that if she were to testify, that I think she wouldn't do the types of things she did in the last couple of trials with those unprovoked sort of snark attacks at Dan.
I agree with that.
Ski hat Sarah, I'm gonna have to trade my ski hat in for an STS hat. I got to get hats on the merch store link. I'm gonna get the chief technical officer on
It's
that.
for sale. Anybody want to buy it?
That's right. Put it on eBay. Starting bid is $5,000. Carl Steinbeck, next point.
Okay, so Wendi was the only witness I had seen in these two Dan Markel murder cases where she was actually subpoenaed with immunity, and with that, having also a lawyer present. So that's a very, very odd combination to have as a lawyer present. And she's representing the victims, her own boys in this matter. And so for her to have a lawyer in there, I thought it was very, very, very odd occurrence. And also, she was never asked questions about how she was affected by the murder or how the kids were affected. Some of those kind of initial questions you could have asked of a victim of a murder when you're questioning them on direct. So those kind of questions or even on cross. Those kind of questions are not even probed into by her. And somebody like her would not be able to come across credible at all. So this is just a really weird situation. I thought I'm not familiar with other states having those kind of laws with immunity like Florida does. So maybe Tim could expound on that a little bit more. But it definitely seems very odd and peculiar to have to lawyer up, sort of like the Benet Ramsey parents having a lawyer up. It just is something that you don't see. And if you think of the timing of it as well, she gave her first 5-hour interview, and after that, she skated town and never wanted anything to do with the police again. And that just doesn't make any kind of a sense for being an innocent victim in this whole thing.
That's a good point. Tim, you want to comment on that?
Oh, yeah. So if the state subpoenas you to be a witness, you're given immunity for the testimony that you give. You have to make sure when you get that immunity, you got to make sure the immunity is for cross-examination also. And I had a case I had Brian Winchester, who was in the Mike Williams murder case. I got him full immunity. He got on the stand and testified how he shot and killed his best friend. And he got full immunity, but I made sure that the immunity covered cross-examination, because if you don't, you got to get the judge to say that on the record. If they say something on cross and you don't have full immunity for all of the whole proceedings, it can be used against them.
Carl Steinbeck, I've been throwing all the questions to Tim and John because you're kind of running the show here, but Pedo Love, I believe this will all be a show. This is an interesting comment to me. Yes, they'll be charged, but it will be all for show so that the public will think and believe that these elites get the same judicial treatment they all walk. Is there anything to be said for the fact that the Adelsons are a well-to-do, wealthy family? There were allegedly connections between the father and Willie Meggs, who Tim Jansen talked about. Is there anything to this that sometimes rich folk walk and the poor people don't necessarily have the same privilege?
Well, I've always said that there's a huge amount of politics that the general public is not aware of in criminal law settings, including military criminal law settings as well. Especially, it's gotten worse every year that I was on active duty, and since then, there's been a lot of things in the media where they're trying to take away, for example, the ability to prosecute certain type of cases, including sex crimes. They want to take that authority away from the commanders and leave it to some kind of civilian type prosecutors. But because they've believed that Congress has believed that the military is not handling cases properly. But what is not really seen out there is the fact that there's so many frivolous allegations, and that's where I've learned how to cross-examine folks that are lying about soldiers committing acts of violence against them. And so that's why I can see similar examples with cross-examining someone like Wendi, who's setting herself up as being innocent in this whole thing. And so the politics, though, yeah, I mean, I've seen the full gamut from prosecutors being afraid and timid, and they'll only take a case where they know for sure that even that with their mediocre skills, they'll get a conviction. And then on the other side of the extreme I've had to deal with is prosecutors where they're just overcharging and going after everybody. They hide evidence. They don't care about really the truth of what justice is about. So you have the whole gamut of everything in between. And that's sort of like what I think the public doesn't really have an insight into. And so what you really have is a different culture in each county, each city, each state. Everything's a little bit different. I mean, the stuff I see going on with this case in Tallahassee, that's why I got involved with it, and it became outraged that nothing was being done, because I thought this is so outside the norm of the way I'm used to seeing things happening. And so granted, I'm licensed there, and Tim has more insights to that, but from my experience in my foxhole, being in licensed a number of states, being in federal court, and also being in military courts around the world, it's just really different down there how they're handling this case. These cases, I should say.
That's interesting. Roxanne A., this is for you, Tim. By the way, you're getting 10 million comments about your amazing hat. I want you to know. Wendi's testimony the last time around, can it be held against her even with the immunity, since she clearly lied? Tim Jansen, you would know the answer.
They can cross-examine her if her testimony differs from what she testified on the stand. So if she comes back later and says something else, or Georgia tries to impeach her with some of these comments she made about Dan, and she says, oh, no, Dan was great, I loved him, they can impeach her with those statements. I don't believe they can use it against her in her trial, because she was given immunity.
As I like to say, we are the future, Tim Jansen. Carol Mitchell is a day ahead of us in Australia. Go ahead.
Let me say that one point about the wealthy skate. I do not believe the wealthy skate. I think the wealthy have resources that allow them to hire top-notch lawyers. They're allowed to hire great investigators, and they get experts. So is it fair or unequal? Absolutely unequal. But you can have someone worth a couple $100 million and they can still get convicted. But they have the resources that every person doesn't have. And you'll see the public defender. Their offices have unlimited resources kind of for getting experts. So they do get good experts, the public defender. But
Harold, anything but dull. Harold, I missed you. Where have you been? John Singer, for you, doesn't it make sense not to indict either Wendi or Donna until Charlie is convicted? Because if Charlie is acquitted, God forbid, wouldn't the state be forced to dismiss charges?
No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't have to dismiss the charges. Just because if God forbid, I'll use that phraseology, Charlie were to be acquitted, that wouldn't impact whether or not charges could stick against Donna or Wendi. There are going to be different juries, and a jury may, one jury may be much more favorable than the other for the prosecution. So I do think that what happened last time in 2022 was they were waiting and hoping that Magmanua would flip on Charlie so that the case would get easier. When it became apparent that that was not going to happen, then they had to indict Charlie, because they couldn't have a situation where Magmanua could point to the wealthy Adelsons and say, look, they're all free and I'm not, and therefore that could divert the jury, and it could then bring into issues like class and race and money and things like that. So they had to have Charlie indicted by the time Katie went to trial. I think here, I'm hoping that the same playbook is being replicated, that they're going to see if Charlie ever does decide to flip on his family. I don't think he will, but if it becomes apparent in September or early October that that's not going to happen and that he's going to go full steam ahead, then at that point, maybe they would go ahead and indict Donna. That's what I'm hoping, that they follow the same playbook they followed the last time.
And here's Judy once again from Asian American Legal Focus. She wanted, meaning Wendi, to have the whole week to pack up all her stuff and keep conspiring with her family without Jeff witnessing what was going on. Judy knows more about this than most. Carl, onward we go.
All right. So for number 78, when Georgia was questioning Wendi on the first trial 3 years ago, and I got that from the Law and Order or Law and Crime Network on YouTube. And within the first 15 minutes, I mean, you can see what a terrible testimony Wendi had. Just nothing was coming across as being credible. A jury could really pick up on that. In fact, one of the jurors that was interviewed afterwards thought that Wendi was involved in it. That's with just a limited amount of information. So imagine if you brought all this kind of information in a trial against Wendi. I think it would easily set the tone for a conviction. So Wendi was asked when they moved to Tallahassee with Dad from the second time why they had moved. And Wendy's answer was that Dan had tried to get a job at Miami and it didn't work out. Well, she's leaving a big part of that chunk out of what actually happened was that they were going together as a team. They were a married couple. As a team, they were trying to get hired on Miami. It was a trial basis down there. And after their year was up, they actually were not both given a job offer. So for her just to deflect this as being Dan couldn't get the job, it was actually both of them. And from what I understand, they never did tell him whether it was one or the other. You know, there could be some schools of thought saying, well, maybe Dan was a little bit too aggressive or something and was intimidating for some of the other professors there. Or maybe they thought Wendi wasn't carrying her weight. We don't know which of those it actually is, because I think the school never had to come on board to find that out. But as a prosecutor, I definitely want to find that out and see if this is something that was definitely an indicator that that she's not being straight up with the court.
Tim Jansen, your reaction to this about not being able to get a job in Miami?
Well, it wasn't surprising, and there's rumors that she wasn't. University mommy didn't think much of her. Um, Dan had pretty extensive credentials. He did a really good job at FSU Law School, and he was well thought of as a professor. I would think that would be a nice place for him at the University of Miami. I don't know if that moves the ball for me, but I get what Carl's saying. You keep putting that Chinese water torture, and eventually you're going to throw her off and show her who she is. And I think if she was subject to a 8 hours or 2-day cross examination, I think she would fold. I think the jury would get a good look at her. You can only make up and connive and convince people so long when the truth comes out.
Tim Jansen, when you're preparing for a criminal trial, do you and your partner, Mr. Davis, whoever that is, one day I will meet this person, do you guys go through similar exercises? Do you put together lists like this and bounce off point and counterpoints with each other?
We do. Sometimes we'll do a focus group. Sometimes we'll do a mock trial, especially if the client has the resources. So you can get a view from outsiders, what they find important. You can bounce off theories of your defense. You can see what your theory they like or they don't like. If they like your client, they don't like your client. And you kind of determine which group is favorable to your case. So when you do jury selection, you already kind of know who is going to be friendly and who's going to be not so friendly. But certainly questions like this, yeah, you have them prepared.
And Windsor's back. He must have gone to get water, and now he's licking his chompers, and now he's laying down. Jeannie Castellano, the other half of Jimmy Castellano from Portland. John, for you, Wendi was trying to throw the police off by incriminating her brother. Like, what sister would do that? What about that in a court of law to play that up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what she did in the interrogation was designed to, as part of this elaborate ruse, like what person who was involved in a crime or whose family was involved in a crime would then willingly, of their own volition, offer up their family member. So she was doing things during that interrogation to try to throw the police off. I agree with that comment wholeheartedly. And I also agree with what Carl said. In the first trial in particular, she lied so frequently during her direct testimony about things that were so mundane and the things she didn't need to lie about. She said her parents weren't millionaires. She said she didn't know her brother drove a Ferrari. She said she was relieved when the relocation motion was denied. Things that were just so obvious falsehoods that she just didn't need to do. And I also agree with what Tim said. With a withering cross-examination by a skilled examiner, which these prosecutors are, I do think she'll fold. I think that I also agree with what Tim was saying about John Lauro, that on this record, the likelihood of her testifying is very small. Conversely, the likelihood of Charlie testifying, I think, is almost a guarantee, because the evidence against him is so strong. He's going to need to testify on his own behalf as a Hail Mary. And I think given his pathology and given what we know about him, and given everything we've heard about him, he's going to insist that he testifies. And I don't think Rashbaum's going to be able to prevent it. So those are just some points on that.
He's preparing for both ways.
Yeah.
And told me he felt comfortable both ways.
Yeah.
It's going to take us, by the way, 79 years to get through this list. I just did the math, but we're okay. Lynn Strouser, love this panel, followed by shout out to Jersey. By the way, Jen Castaldi, I saw you out there, so hello to you. But 4 handsome gentlemen tonight, STS best guests. So kind of you, Bella Michelle. Followed by Lynn, any of them single. Tim Jansen is for the summer. Just don't tell his wife I said that.
I think she's listening.
I'm joking. Mrs. Jansen, I'm joking. I went out of my way to send your lovely husband his swag. I would never condone such behavior. Carl Steinbeck is looking at me in disgust. Carl, next point.
All right, this is another question from Georgia in this series of questions where you just can't get the truth out of Wendi. And that was the question being, is your family in South Florida wealthy? And Wendi stares straight ahead and doesn't give any kind of response at all to Georgia. And then Georgia offers up, I know it's a relative term. And then Wendi, with a big smile and looking happy, says, are you asking me to speculate? And then Georgia says, no, I'm asking if they are wealthy. If you don't know, you don't know. And Wendi says, it depends on how you define wealthy. And then Georgia has to go on even further saying, well, are they millionaires? And then Wendi laughs and smiles and says, no. But then she's closing both of her eyes while shaking her head side to side like this, which is a clear indicator from all the trials I've done in front of juries that the person's lying. So I just thought that any Tallahassee jury there would be able to easily find that all the Adelsons were wealthy. From what I gather, they have roughly at the time probably about $3.5 million in property jointly between them down there. And yet Wendi can't even admit that. And I think this all goes to, she doesn't want to admit even the obvious, which is that they could afford to pay the $100,000 in cash to the murderous hit team. So I think that's why in her mind, she goes, I'm not going to go there. No, we're not. We're just a normal family. We don't make a lot of money. Of course, we couldn't come up with $1 million cash. And certainly we wouldn't have it stapled. So I just thought that was very telling.
John Singer?
I think that it was all performative art and sport for her, especially the first trial. I think that she, by the second trial, things had changed a bit, right? She had been named as a co-conspirator. Her brother was now in prison, right? So they were closing in on the family. In 2019, she's laughing and saying that the police is never going to charge her. It was all performative art for her. It was all just to show that she was smart and she was clever and she could parse questions. And I think she was having a good time with it. I really do. I think that's what that was.
By the way, Windsor is looking curiously out the window. The way you know Tim Jansen is a true Floridian, he sends me a picture the other day of an alligator on his property. And I wrote back, is that a friggin' alligator? And he goes, oh, it's a baby alligator. That thing do you see them a lot, Tim?
No, it was kind of weird. My other dog, my little poodle, Cavapoo, he's the alpha. Windsor's just a follower. He just
your alpha would have been destroyed in 2 seconds, but what do you do?
But I agree on Wendi. She looks terrible. And not only was she a liar, she came across smug. And the one thing that jurors hate are smug liars. And my friend was on the second jury. He said they didn't believe a word Magbonawa said. They didn't believe a word Wendi said. And he said Magbonawa should not have taken the stand.
Oh, she was horrendous the second time. I mean, the second time it was a noticeable difference from the first trial, and perhaps that's what sitting in prison for an additional 2.5 years or 3 years, whatever it was, by the time of that second trial had done to her. But she was a disaster in the second trial.
Yeah, Sarah just
destroyed her.
And if I was where she would have got immunity. I would have had her get immunity. But she did a proffer. She didn't give anything. She didn't give anything. And so she's not going to be a witness. I know Charlie's lawyer is hoping, praying she's a witness. So deflect everything and cast the whole case on this liar. That's how bad the state's case is. They have to bring a murderer who perjured herself twice and is convicted of murder to come in here and try to prosecute my client.
John Singer, we've asked Tim this many times, and Carl, I believe, too. I'll let Carl weigh in. But misdemeanor, what was Wendi's strategy in wearing the same dress for both trials? I can't figure out her manipulation with this maneuver. I know there's a Wendi angle. Tim has famously said an actor wears the same costume on stage, but what's your answer?
I think that she just, when you Google her or when you look at her, I think that she just wanted to minimize and sort of conflate the two trials so that people would think she only testified once. I don't know. She's a sociopath. It's very hard to delve into her mind and what her mindset was, but I think it may have just been, if you were Googling her and you were seeing her you would have assumed that this was just one trial. Not that, I don't know how much difference that would have made in her life, that she was only involved in one, not two trials, but that's all I could think of there.
That's actually kind of interesting. From Nicola Smallbone, Carl, to you. Hey guys from the Gold Coast. Will Georgia confirm with Wendy's friend that she requested bullet whiskey or bourbon? Because if she didn't request it, doesn't that show how callous Wendi was purposely choosing it? I don't know if the list has been so long and going on for a while. Have you brought up this whole notion of purposely buying bullet whiskey?
Yes, that's actually not on this list I have here tonight, and we haven't covered that in the past. I think it's been brought up in conversation because I think it's another one of those deals where, well, of course she wouldn't have gotten bullet if she was a part of this. But she got it because she didn't have anything to hide. That's why she got the bullet. That's what the defense counsel would argue. But I think the flip side of that is she was planting all these little seeds. Well, a guilty person wouldn't, do this or that. And so that's why I would definitely follow that up. I never saw that in the police report as to whether they did follow that up. But I thought, how if you think of how many people were invited to that party, number one, what are the odds? Let's just say there's 12 of them. What are the odds the only one person that's asked to buy a specific bullet type of drink happens to be Wendi Adelson, and she happens to buy it within an hour or two of her husband having a bullet or two to the head, her ex-husband. So it's just such an odd circumstance. And as Tim says, there's no coincidences in a homicide case. And I think it's not a coincidence. And maybe she just, made that up or something, or maybe they just said maybe they said that in actuality. And I just think the odds of that happening are so extremely rare and odd that I think it was something that she probably made up.
It's like a taunt. Again,
Right.
Being the dumb juror that I am, if I heard that, I'm saying, she's taunting this family and whoever's coming after her. So for me, it's always these little things that become big things. This is John Singer's pseudonym, Eric Enchi. When is Wendi going to be arrested? Let's go. And then Tim Jansen, before we move forward, this is an interesting question. Do you think there will be evidence that comes out during the trial, I guess Charlie's trial, that charges could come for the ex-wife? How much new evidence could come out in Charlie's trial that we just simply don't know about?
It depends on what Charlie puts on the witness stand. I'm sure they're working. They're pretty thorough. They have now Isom retired. The FBI agent Sanford is doing mostly all technical IT kind of stuff. They got investigators in the office. Newsom, he's pretty good. And Georgia's going to want to make sure she's detailed like Carl. She goes from point A to point B in trial. She never loses her cool. She's, no matter what you do across, her witnesses falls apart. She keeps her cool. She really does. That's one of the things I admire about her. She always keeps a steady keel. And you like prosecutors like that because then they're doing their job. Sometimes you get prosecutors that jump up and down and they're looking for a conviction. She just portrays herself. I'm just presenting you the evidence. Now in cross-examination, she's not going to suffer a fool very long, and she'll put you in a corner. And I think her cross-examination of Wendi, and if she testifies, would be a lot different than when she's a witness. A lot different.
If I was cross-examining Marina Archetype Reader in south of Spain, I would say, Ms. Archetype Reader, are you implying that it's only his hair that is handsome and not his actual face? Because that is how I read it. And she would have to answer. She might say, yeah, it's just his hair. I don't know. Carl Steinbeck, let's try to get, I know this is almost impossible. Let's try to go 20 minutes and get to 90 if we can.
Okay. All right. So number 80, she was asked again by Georgia, was part of the reason for your disagreement or separation having to do with how to raise the children in terms of your faith? And Wendi answered, yes, we had different ways of faith. And she just left it at that. I mean, this is like such a generic answer to such an explosive issue. There was such conflicts with how to raise the children. There was even a conflict, of course, we mentioned that during the wedding, because the wedding didn't have kosher food as Dan thought there was, and there was a big disaster at the wedding just over that alone. So it was a constant theme throughout the wedding, from the wedding on throughout the marriage, especially when they had the boys, because the boys, according to Dan's belief, needed to have kosher and only kosher, and she didn't care whatsoever, and didn't care to enforce it even when the boys were with the grandparents. So I just thought this is again just downplaying. It's not a big data point. But it's a data point to show she's just not going to even volunteer information. So yeah, this was a real point of contention in our marriage, and it was a big factor in leading towards a divorce.
Best comment so far from Sonny Tanner. Tim's dog Windsor has the best hair. John, any reaction to what you just heard?
No, I think that, what Carl said is accurate. I mean, she wouldn't give an inch. She just was going to fight on everything, from the significant points about relocation and her reaction to the denial of the motion to very, very, very trite points and points that of major insignificance. So, she just wasn't going to give in that time. What it means in the long run, will she ever testify consistently therewith when she's on trial herself? If she does testify, I don't think so. But I do agree with Carl that the general tenor of her testimony was not give an inch, not admit the big points, not admit even the little points.
Kyle D'Angelo is one of my favorite topics. Wendi will go to jail, unlike Shaquille O'Neal. He is confident. Yin Yang watching us in Norway. Shout out to Norway. Carl, next point.
All right. Next question was, were your parents very involved in trying to facilitate that relocation to South Florida? And Wendi said, merely, my parents were supportive of me moving to South Florida. So she didn't want to go down the road of how involved they actually were. And so what I think of the very obvious thing a jury would pick up on is that she was deflecting the pressures from Donna to divorce and move down there, to have her sunshines down there, because that actually, by her not explaining that and going into that in more detail, she's taken away the motives for the rest of the Adelsons to be a part of that murder. So she just didn't want to go there and admit the obvious again.
Tim Jansen?
Oh, I agree. I think she clearly understated that. The jury knows that if they listen to the text messages and the phone calls, the mother was furious. And she was talking to Charlie. Clearly shows motive on their behalf. The mother, does Wendi know about it? No. That to me shows the mother is trying to cover for Wendi. I would love to see Georgia charge Wendi. I would love to see Georgia do it. I think we all would love to see it. I just can't get there that why Georgia hasn't done it yet. And I'm still kind of perplexed why she hasn't charged Donna. Because I think Donna and Charlie in the same trial would not be too much to overcome, because they have the phone messages and calls and stuff. I just don't know.
Tim, have you ever flat out asked her? You see her occasionally. Is that inappropriate?
I would not divulge what Georgia told me, but I don't know if Georgia herself is making the decision. And there might be other things going on that we don't know about. Maybe Magbonawa has evidence against Donna and not against Charlie. But Magbonawa's useless. She can't be used as a witness. I mean, Georgia's too much of a good prosecutor to put her on the stand.
You guys can read through the tea leaves there from Tim Jansen, who is very tapped into the epicenter of Tallahassee. Sean Beecher, King Carl, followed by Lieutenant Colonel Carl. Carl, let's move on to the next point.
Next question Georgia had was, would you describe your parents as being over-involved in your personal business? And then Wendi, again, won't even come up with a straight answer. She then says, compared to other people's parents. And then Georgia responds with, yeah. And then Wendi, then she having this little projecting an innocent, soft-spoken voice says, I don't think so. So, and yet square that against the fact that Donna selected Dan on J-Date. She also pressed for the divorce to Dan. She also had all the things we talked about with the Hitler Youth comment, posing as a fake conversion of the boys to Christianity to try to punish Dan and force him to agree to relocate to Miami. So you got this extremely over-involved mother, and she won't even admit that. So she says, I don't think so. So I just thought that once a jury hears all that kind of stuff, and of course, I mean, Wendi would even known that Georgia's going to bring up the thing about, the email from Donna and all that. So, I mean, she by her just not admitting that, I thought that was just so telling as to how a terrible of a testimony she gave.
Scott for Tim Jansen, what's the likelihood they charge Wendi with a lesser crime versus going all or nothing? Probably my favorite comment of the day right here so far. Looky Lou, what did John Singer do to piss off his wife, and why is he streaming from his bathroom?
It's actually my kitchen, but I do a lot of things to piss her off. But it is my kitchen, so.
Yelling at his son on the flag football field is one of them.
Yes.
Tim, I don't even remember what I just read. But you
probably would be charged with a lesser.
Yes, correct. Yes.
Absolutely zero. She's either going to be in or out. She's either going to charge her or not. She's not going to charge her. She may charge her with conspiracy, commit first-degree murder, which is the same effect, really. Gets in all the co-conspirator statements for evidentiary purposes. So that's pretty good.
Helen Stewart, OMG, Carl is really, really good. That is why he is playing the state here and presenting his prosecution. Continue on, Carl Steinbeck. Carl does not, he just is unflappable, this guy. I love it. Go ahead, Carl.
Well, the other thing that was really bizarre, I thought, was that Wendi even fought a subpoena to testify at a deposition that defense counsel had subpoenaed her to. And she hired an attorney to fight that, not only at the trial court level, but she actually fought it on appeal, and she actually won. And the basis why she said she didn't need to do that was because this was basically a form of harassment, taking up her time unnecessarily and whatnot. So I don't know if the deposition would have been at her location down in Miami or if it would have been up there in Tallahassee, but it doesn't make any difference either way, because you're a vital witness and a key participant in the government's case to prosecute the people behind murdering your boy's father. So for her to take that extreme, to hire lawyers to fight this to that degree. Now, she did wind up giving a deposition at some point, but pretty much all the answers asked were, I plead the fifth. And so it was really not fruitful at all. So with her testimony then also shrouded in immunity, why would she resist all that? I think this all goes to show she can't defend her and her family's actions that took part in planning Dan's murder. That's the only thing that makes sense.
Annie says, I love this panel. I have a huge crush on John. Unbelievable. It must be the toupee. John Singer, we've talked about this before, about pleading the fifth. It's obviously a constitutional right. But what about someone pleading the fifth too much? Does a jury start to get skeptical? They are human beings after all.
It's a tough question.
Well, they're instructed not to, right? But
yeah, I mean, they're instructed not to. I think, but just picking up on what Carl said about, her fighting the subpoena, it's clear as day, she wants nothing to do with this. Mm-hmm. She wants nothing to do with any of this. She knows the government's theory. She knows what social media has said about her. She knows what people in her circle have stated about her. She's been ostracized by certain segments of society. She knows what Georgia Cappleman thinks of her. She wants nothing to do with any of this, and she just wants to make it go away. Fortunately for her, fortunately for us, and unfortunately for her, that's not the case. It's not just going to go away, but she didn't want to speak to the police after the original 5-hour sit down. She's never wanted to give a deposition. She wanted to be anywhere but the witness stand in either trial. She wants nothing to do with it. She wants to live her life. She got what she wanted. Donna got what she wanted. They want to go on and live their lives in South Florida and erase the memory of Dan Markel. That's all this has ever been about.
By the way, Space Coast has put up Carl Steinbeck's YouTube channel, Jury Trial Mentor. Check it out. Carl, next point.
All right, think of the fact that Wendi did plead the fifth at the deposition when asked what did she discuss with her parents and Charlie about the murder. And she didn't want to answer that because it shows extreme length. She doesn't want the truth to come out, like John just alluded to. And so it leads you to the idea that if this is not a joint operation from the get-go involving all the Adelsons, then what she's basically done and clearly shown is that her family should get a free pass at murdering Dan, and she's going to do everything she can to resist the prosecutions and make sure her family stays out of jail. And for her boys to have to suffer through that, it's just beyond belief.
Tim, any comment or reaction to that?
I can see her lawyer trying to get out of the depot. I can see her taking the fifth out of abundance of caution. He probably was sitting right next to her. What you do is you normally have a 5x7 card that says, I plead the fifth. When the question comes up, they look at your lawyer. She answers, I plead the fifth. I plead the fifth. And as a lawyer, you do it more though than you would overprotective, because she's been told, I'm sure, by Georgia and them that she's a target, certainly a suspect. So she would have a Fifth Amendment. And I think Georgia in her cross-examination and in her openings has basically said the whole motive was to get the kids for Wendi. So she has a viable Fifth Amendment. And
Sure.
I would advise her to take it at a depot also.
Tim Jansen, this is a very simple question from Bundy Data. He was killed in 2014, Dan Markel. Why so long?
Well, you can't forget you had COVID, which pretty much shut down the state courts for like a year and a half, 2 years. You had a change in judges. You had a mistrial. You had a hung jury. Magbonawa took another trial. You had a change in the leadership at the state attorney's office. You had change in prosecutors from the first trial to the second. But it shouldn't take that long. But then again, they hired South Florida lawyers who needed additional time because they weren't here. They got to get the discovery. And then you have calendars, but it shouldn't take that long.
John Singer, this is a very interesting question that I've never remotely pondered. Do you think Danny's boys would ever be called to testify in the case of the Adelsons? Would they be helpful? They're growing up into very young men, not even teenagers. One might be a teenager now, but could they ever be subpoenaed to testify?
I mean, they could, but I don't know what they have to offer. Again, it's almost the same as subpoenaing Rob Adelson, right? I mean, we know from the Over My Dead Body podcast his feelings on his family, and we know what he thinks happened here, but that's just speculation, right? It's conjecture. He doesn't have any hard evidence. Just like the boys. I mean, if they ever get to the other Adelsons and the boys are 18, 19, 20 by that point, right? It could take that long. They would certainly be able to testify, but their testimony would be useless because unless there was an admission by a parent or an uncle or a grandparent as to involvement or complicity, then I don't know what they would have to offer.
Tiff Knox, Joel, why the hard G when you say John Singer's name? I know you're from New Jersey, but I'm getting a lot of heat for the way I say Ski Hat Sarah. They say it make fun of me. No one has a thicker accent than Bostonians, although Singer's good at covering up. But John, do you think I say your last name weirdly?
I have not noticed that. John, how do you say it? Say it again.
Say John Singer.
John Singer. Yeah, no, I don't. I don't take any exception.
Does Tiff think it's supposed to be Sinjay or something? Like, I don't understand. But got a super sticker from Cheerio Shell. What date did she enroll the kids in South Florida? I have no idea. John Singer, who has a photographic memory, I just made that up. He might know. John, do you have any idea?
I mean, immediately she left Tallahassee on July 21st of 2014, and they were good to go by August. I mean, Florida schools start earlier than they do here. So they were enrolled in August of 14 under the name Adelson. The names were legally changed the following year in July of 15, but they were enrolled under Adelson in August of 14, and she left Tallahassee, I think, on the Monday which was July 21st of 14.
John, do you have a photographic memory now that
I have something that approximates a photographic memory. So if you said to me, John, can you name the Patriots' first 6 games of the 1976 season and give me the scores, I could do that. Yes.
Wow. Going back how far?
I could. Well, my first season as a fan was 76. So I could do that. I could give you the first 6 games with the scores. So I don't know if it makes me.
Could you do that for any? Are you Rain Man? Like in 1981, could you tell me who the first 6 games the Patriots were against?
I could. And I could also, like when I give opening statements or closing statements, which can be 3 hours, I don't use a note. Dates and numbers are very, are something that I'm very good with. But then again, I can't remember my wife told me to do 5 minutes ago. So that might just make me a husband. But
that's usually the case, though. So that, wow, you learn something new every day. So
she said she claims it's a selective photographic memory. So we'll go with that.
All wives say that.
Yeah. John Singer is what is known as an idiot savant. His wife probably thinks he's more idiot than savant.
She would delete the savant, yes.
Wow, amazing. Were you valedictorian of your high school class in Newton, Massachusetts?
No, I sucked at science and math. So I was.
You did?
Yeah, I was terrible at science and math.
Oh, wow. By the way, for those who do not know, John Singer went to high school with the Joe Rogan, who I'm going to overtake one day as a podcast host one of these days. This is a great suggestion, and then we're going to move on. Joel Y'all from Nashville need to sell STS ski hats. That's a great idea. How about beanies? STS beanies. Let's do it. Carl Steinbeck, before he beats me up, let's move on. Are we on to 85 here?
Actually, 86.
86. I'm sorry, 86. I stand corrected.
No, I'm sorry. We are 85. I jumped ahead. Yeah. All right. So Georgia asked, are you upset at being stuck in Tallahassee? And that was after the motion to relocate was denied by the judge. And Wendi says, I was happy at my job and I was relieved. So you compare that with the amount of money she would have spent. Well, her and the family, I'm sure they kicked in a bunch. But it's probably from what I've seen in Texas, they probably easily spent $100,000 to try to get this relocation done. And to have all that just be a relief when she was the one that initiated it, it just makes actually no sense. Because, again, I think it's trying to take away from the fact that that's how desperate she was to get to Miami and provide some motive.
John Singer, I'm obsessed with this. Now, if I asked you what was the final score of Game 7 between the Celtics and the Heat this season, do you know the answer?
No, because I don't know the stuff recently. I know all the old stuff. And the Celtics Heat, I turned it off with about 3 minutes left. So I wouldn't know the score of that one.
And is it only Patriot stuff? Like if I asked you what score did the Buffalo Bills lose their 3rd Super Bowl loss to, you know?
It's I can do most of the Super Bowls, but it's mostly Patriot stuff. It's mostly Patriot stuff. But I can give you, if you gave me the 50, what are we up to now? 57 Super Bowls, I could probably give you the scores of 50 of them. I don't know, close to that.
I definitely have to drink scotch at a bar with you and start asking you really random questions. That's one of my favorite things to do. Okay, number 86, Carl Steinbeck.
All right, so after establishing the divorce happened in July 31st of 2013, Georgia said, would you consider divorce with Dan Markel to be a nasty divorce? When he said, I think most divorces aren't very pleasant. So again, you have her not even wanting to admit it was a nasty one, and we know how expensive it was. And then Georgia says, okay, but this one was very unpleasant, right? And then Wendi says, yes, I consider this divorce to be very unpleasant, but that's all she would say. So then Georgia goes into further detail and says, in litigation, you two even fought over things as small as a tennis racket, right? So I think that's one of the things that really got Dan, is that she even took out of the house when she did her Pearl Harbor tactic. She even took his tennis racket. I mean, why would you do that? And Wendy's response was, I don't remember that. So to the jury, again, not admitting the obvious stuff. She's just not wanting to show that her and her family had all this motive to have a plot against Dan's life.
Tim Jansen?
I don't disagree with that. The defense is going to say, sure, she's going to downplay the animosity, but that doesn't mean she's a murderer. Doesn't mean she knew anything about it. It may mean that the family did something without her knowledge and protected her and protected the little sister. But I get it.
Tim Jansen, misdemeanor. Is law enforcement still bugging the Adelsons' phones, tailing them? Singer is shaking his head no. What say you, Tim Jansen?
They would not be able to get a wire 3 at this point. I can tell you they're listening to every phone conversation that he has from the jail, for sure.
Tim, how does that work? Are they notified? Like, does Georgia have like an alert every time Charlie makes a call? Does she get notified and then she gets to listen to the tapes, or does she have to keep tabs on that somehow?
So what they have, so every inmate gets a number, and they say, okay, we want all the tapes, all the calls for this number, and then they can tell who they're talking to. And Georgia's not doing it. The investigator will get it. And I had a prosecutor one time tell me, when she was doing discovery in cases, she would just listen to the tapes while she was working, and if she heard something good, then she would. But they use them, and they're very effective because clients are stupid. And not only just the clients, but the family members who's calling will make a statement, and you can't deny it enough. So if they make a statement and you don't deny it, they're going to use that. Oh, that's a consciousness of guilt. That was an admission. You didn't deny it when your mom said, blah, blah, blah.
Tim, are smart people like the Adelsons, are they stupid too? Will they let things slip on phone calls?
I think they don't know what they're saying can be harmful. They think they're talking in codes, or they think they're slick, but they may not know something that the government has, and they say something, it fits right into a piece of evidence that the state has, and it really makes it look incriminating.
Can I ask a question, Joel?
Yes,
of either Tim or Carl. Obviously, the jailhouse calls are recorded, and they're on a recorded line, and the person who is the inmate is notified during every phone call that there is a recording. But what about the attorney-client privilege? When Charlie Adelson is talking to Rashbaum, that's something that is out of bounds for the government to listen to. So how do they parse that out? How do they end up segregating all the other calls from what would arguably fall within the ambit of the attorney-client privilege?
That's a good question. And I have concerns about it, because I remember telling a prosecutor, I told a client one time that we had a prosecutor and said some unfriendly things about the prosecutor. I saw that prosecutor about 2 weeks later, and he kind of repeated what I said.
Wow. Okay.
And I was like, oh shit. So I just denied it. But so I do not talk to any client on a phone at all. And I know in federal court they do, because I had a hearing one time, and luckily they had the government introduced my recording with my client at a 2255 hearing, which I didn't think they were. So I think they record them, but they just can't use them. So I make it a practice never to talk to my clients over the phone. And if your clients are in custody, they don't like it, but I just don't trust the system.
I mean, I know Rashbaum is spending hours upon hours speaking to Charlie Adelson on the phone. I know that's. I mean, he said it during one of the status conferences that, when he was arguing why an adjournment was necessary, it was because they were having issues with the 57,000 pages of discovery or 57,000 documents, and they couldn't get all the tapes in there. But he said he was speaking to Charlie for hours upon hours on the phone. I'm just wondering, how that, that's clearly within the ambit of the attorney-client privilege. How do they know that the prosecutor is not listening to that?
You hope so.
Yeah.
But that's more of a reason why they should have local counsel that can go out there and visit him in a private setting and talk to him.
That's a really interesting point. Love this show. Just found it a couple months ago. I think I've watched almost everything already. Don't worry, we keep pumping out content. John Singer, do you remember your wife's birthday?
Yes, August 6th. But I will not tell you the year.
It's a day before my mother's birthday. Yeah, but definitely years apart. We're going to move on one sec. From Asian American Legal Focus, Judy, I've got to ask her questions. Can Tim give any more info about Jack Campbell? Do you think it was wrong for him to try to get a bar grievance against Mentor Lawyer, who has been following this case? Any comment on this, Tim?
Who is Mentor Lawyer?
He has a YouTube channel called Mentor Lawyer. And,
I got it now. This is a guy that collects. He gets discovery on the computer and sends it out, right?
Yeah, and right here, misdemeanor. Yes, he is an OG channel for this case. He's great. Yeah.
Yeah, Jack was completely wrong on that, and I think Jack does do a knee-jerk reaction sometimes. He's gotten better as he's matured, but if you get him on the wrong day, he will do that. And
what did he do? What was the bar grievance? Was it emanating from this case, relating to
he claimed that somebody was getting public records that on the computer on CJIS and putting them online. Well, they're public records, and he's not sworn to any protective order. If they're on a public page, they're access, and you can use them. So he thought it, because he was a bar member, that he could file a complaint against him. I believe that's what it was about.
The godmother of all things Markel and Adelson has entered the building. Fancy fiction. Narcissists are sensitive to criticism. #Wendi. If you do not know Fancy Fiction, go to her YouTube channel under the same name. Notice she spells fancy like Wendy with an I, not a Y. And she puts wiretaps and all things related to this case. Knows more about it, I would argue, than not Georgia Kaplan, but maybe close. Go ahead, Carl. I think we're at 87.
Right. So Georgia then asked, did he threaten to press kidnapping charges against you, he being Dan? And after Tara Kawas objected to hearsay, which I thought was really odd, why wouldn't you want this kind of information out there? And the judge overruled her. Wendy says, no, I don't remember that. So not remembering something like that, it's just again, just preposterous that she would claim to not know that. And so one of many.
Fancy fiction for Tim Jansen. Can you give any other color as to what you've heard in regards to the Magbanua proffer? I'm very surprised that there is nothing there. She can tie up so many details, big and small. Tim Jansen, this is coming from Fancy Fiction, so you better get your answer straight.
So now I'm going to put my prosecutor hat on, and I've had to convict this woman. I've offered her immunity twice, many times. She took me to trial. She testified and perjured herself in 2 trials. The jury's convicted her of first-degree murder. The only way I could use her is only if she had a piece of evidence that I needed to prosecute Charlie. It had to be of such significance that I would ask an appellate court to overturn the conviction and convince the mother of Markel to let this woman get out of her life sentence. My understanding, she gave no independent, credible evidence. Her lawyers were not even present, and it was fruitless. They went through an exercise of trying to give her a shot, but you got such a high standard at that point that you can't use her as a witness. So you're not going to get rid of a life sentence for someone you can't use it. And if I'm the prosecutor, do I want to put this woman on the stand and have to eat that she's a liar and a murderer? And now she's worthless.
Maya, she's a Patriots fan for John Singer. This is something my mother would say here, which I love. I'm a firm believer that everybody is entitled to my opinion. I'm sure my mother will be repeating this as a mantra. By the way, this is a great question, Carl Steinbeck. Who has ever had a TV repairman in the last 40 years, by the way? That is a excellent point. I think the last TV we got fixed was when I lived in Manlius, New York in 1976, when I had a cable box this big. Go ahead, Carl. What number are we on? 88 here? We're going to get to 90, I promise.
Yes. And so the next question was, did he threaten to go after your law license, meaning Dan? And Wendy, with a frowning face, says, I don't remember that. No. And that was just so unbelievable, because no lawyer would ever forget such a threat. I mean, there's nothing to heighten the defenses of a lawyer than if you say something threatening about their bar license. And so for her to say, no, I don't remember that, I think that was really the main thing of why she really wanted to sign off and not have to face the accusations of Dan in front of a judge, because Dan also had the authority over the school. She was the big rock star there at the FSU Law School. She wasn't. She was only an adjunct. And so he could have gotten her fired in a heartbeat once he proved this stuff up in court. So, and then her law license on top of that, possibly she didn't know and didn't want to find out. So for her to say, I don't remember that, is just completely preposterous.
Tim Jansen, that's a good point. You threaten someone's law license, you're not going to forget that. Is this death by 1,000 cuts, Carl Steinbeck style here?
That's a powerful one, because she's an educated woman. She's worked to get this license. She's a professor, and someone threatens your bar license. You're gonna remember that. That's like someone threatening your kids. You're gonna remember that.
Yeah. John, would you remember that if someone threatened you?
Yes, sure. I agree with that.
Okay. 89, I think, right, Carl?
Right. And then the next was, do you remember him saying that you failed to disclose a bunch of assets in the divorce process? Then here, though, Wendi says, I do remember that. So she didn't even dispute the allegation of that. But this was such a huge issue for her, loss of job. I think she just didn't want to go down that road. And she knew that this was another big issue that she had to run from. And she just didn't want to go down that road. So I think at that point, she decided to say, I remember. But again, she didn't deny it either. So that shows that she was worried about getting prosecuted for this. So I think that's really a dagger against her.
John Singer?
For the interest of getting to number 90, I will not disagree with that one. Although I will say that in divorce, especially in the divorces to which I've been privy, there's a lot of accusations back and forth about hiding assets. That's like divorce 101, right? Did you hid assets? You didn't disclose that account. You understated your income. I mean, you see that in almost every, affluent person's divorce proceeding. So I don't know how much I'm moved by that, but for the sake of getting to number 90, I will agree with it.
Let's get to 90, but real quick, Tim, this is an interesting question from Sonny Tanner. Why did she spend so much time in the police interview without asking for a lawyer and then complains about it on the stand? Any theory there quickly?
That's an interesting perspective. This in the Winchester case has so much parallels to it, because she was a victim of, in the case with Winchester, she was a victim of a kidnapping and almost murder, and she spent all the time being interviewed, never asked for a lawyer, didn't want to be there, and she's there and didn't ask for a lawyer. She probably thought, I got this thing covered. I've got my answers. I've got my script. I'm just going to keep talking, acting like I'm not a suspect. And people do that.
They rehearsed it for weeks. Yeah. I mean, she was in South Florida for 2 weeks in late June. And she just had come back to Tallahassee. I think it was on July 10th, right before, or maybe it was even later, a couple of days before the murder. So they were all there together. You can picture the Adelsons huddled up, feeding her what to say in that interrogation, giving her directives, giving her edicts, giving her strict admonitions as to what to do, what not to do. That entire thing was rehearsed for weeks prior to her sitting with the police.
Bundy data, is this better than Downton Abbey? I would never watch Downton Abbey. Even if my wife forced me, I'd tell her to buzz off, not watching that garbage. But this I would watch every day, 7 times a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Let's get through 90 and we'll wrap it up.
All right.
Steinbeck, number 90.
So then she was asked, did you have any mediations? 8 hours each, and they didn't reach a settlement or resolution, but you did finally reach settlement on the eve of trial on the matter. And Wendi states that she can't recall how many hours the mediation lasted, but they did seem very long. Yet, even there, I think it's a matter of deflection. She can't admit the fact that, if you're in there in mediation for 2 full days, you're also having lunch breaks and stuff like that. That's a lot of time to grind through. And it's really, I think, sort of unusual to have that long of a one. And especially when it's your own personal court case. It's not a client's case that you have blended in all together in your memory. So especially when you're getting billed for it as well by your attorney representing you, and you're looking over the invoice, seeing how much you got a huge fee for that. So I think it is another indicator of her to attempt to deflect the hostility and the motives to try to downplay the nastiness of the divorce.
Guys, we have made it through number 90. Frankie Figs, who wants to meet in Tallahassee to trial watch. Tim Jansen is buying drinks. We might even have you over to his mahogany den over there.
We'll have a party at my house.
Yeah, there you go. Sean Beecher says, Crusher Carl. Look at that. Love it. Wow, we got through it. For those who do not know, Lieutenant Colonel Carl Steinbeck is a former Army JAG. He is an amazing prosecutor. He is the owner of the Steinbeck Law Firm. He also hosts a YouTube channel, Jury Trial Mentor. Then you've got famed Tallahassee defense attorney R. Timothy Jansen with his partner, Mr. Davis, to me. He also spent 5 years as a federal prosecutor. And then you've got Rain Man, John Singer, co-founder of Singer Deutsch LLP, who makes regular appearances all over the place. John, you going out for dinner now that your kids are away tonight with the wife? Is that what's happening?
I've been waiting anxiously.
I could tell. I know you so well now without ever having met you in person. I could tell. Your wife is probably giving you like dagger eyes.
She is getting the toupee ready right as we speak.
Yes. Please don't forget her birthday at dinner. Carl, you're a gentleman and a scholar. Thank you for doing this. We will continue this list in due time. Quick reminder, I am not here next week, but I will be here in look at the Surviving the Survivor hat. There will be shows all next week, not live shows, but there will be shows. There might be a live show on the 27th. Brian Koberger has a court date then. And until then, love you, America. Love you, Tallahassee. Love you, Texas. Love you, Boston and New York City. Hang on a second, guys.